In this week's LEGO City update, I'm going to start a new mega project on the upper platform of the city, but first of all, I'm going to continue with the next module of this rock face I'm building along the part of the city that goes down to the harbor. First of all, I'm beginning with the structure and the scaffolding of the rock face. I've decided to once again turn all the studs by 90 degrees so they all face to the side. And now this is then the most important part of the scaffolding. In order to use this building technique, I'm adding all those long plates in order to now have the studs turned to the side. Then I've simply added a second layer of plates for stability. And now I have to somehow transform this weird looking block into a rock face. First of all, I have to get the basic shape of the rock face, and therefore I'm now adding bricks towards the base of this rock face, because that's the part that's furthest out of the rock face, obviously. And then I'm going further inside as we move uphill, and onto these normal bricks I've added in order to get down the basic structure, I'm now adding slopes, which is then basically the rock work. Having all those studs to the side is the main benefit and the main reason actually of why I'm building the rock face this way, because we can now later on add vegetation, add trees, plants and so on. On the upper part of this rock face, I'm turning the slopes by 90 degrees, so it's basically the normal way of building. And now having all that done, for the base of this rock face, I'm now once again trying to change the angle of the studs, because the rock face would have been otherwise a bit too steep at this part of the module. As you can see, as soon as I'm starting to add the first trees, it immediately looks so much better than before. And this was basically the technique I've developed when building this first rock module a few weeks ago. All these small gaps I have remaining in between the hinges and the different slopes, I'm now simply covering up by plants and adding these round bricks in between the gaps in order to simply close it off and make it look like vegetation is growing out of these small gaps within the rock face that were remaining. I've now simply added a few more plants on the rock face itself, and with that being done, we can now focus on the main part of this update. This was actually quite a spontaneous idea I had. I was simply experimenting with maybe adding a tram line on the upper platform of the LEGO City, and then I simply removed a few trees and then laid train tracks simply on the rest of what I've built earlier. And for some reason I really like the looks of that, and therefore I've decided to once again remove what I've built a few weeks ago, but this is the progress of building a LEGO City, and also why I love building Lego, because you can simply remove anything you are not satisfied with anymore without throwing anything away, because we can obviously simply reuse these Lego pieces later on for another project. So while I was removing this entire area, I was thinking about the exact layout for the tram line. This is probably the beginning or the end, and for the rest of the tram line, I'll now try to get rid of this very grid-like structure I otherwise have when building along the studs. What I of course needed to have in mind was the height of the streets I'll now later on add this tram line to, in order to get that right from the beginning on. Because later on, also with my first experiments right here, this will be the basic building technique of having the train tracks integrated into the street, and therefore I needed to get that height right. But for this part, as you can see right now, I still decided to remove that once again, because I wasn't satisfied with the contrast and decided to build the beginning or the end of the tram line, however you want to look at this, with simple, normal railway sleepers because of the contrast. Otherwise, the entire area would have been too gray, and this will most likely, as I mentioned earlier, be the only part of the entire thing that's added along the studs. For the rest, I'll try to build as many angles into the city as possible. Next up, I added the first stop of the tram line. I decided to use dark green windows for the roofs and then added hinges in order to get this sort of curve. Did the exact same thing for the bicycle stands, so parked bikes don't get wet during rain. And also I always love the aesthetics of having similar style buildings, or in this case, the same building exactly twice next to each other. And therefore I simply decided to do that. Added all these transclear elements for the windows, and having that done, I now needed to work on the contrast. I definitely was lacking color at that point, and therefore decided to add some sort of flower bed or simple plants or trees that are planted along the tram line. And once again, as we look at this entire area right now, all these brown railway sleepers will, for the next modules of the tram line, disappear within the asphalt of the streets, so it then actually becomes a real tram line. But oftentimes, also in my hometown, at the beginning and the end sections of tram lines, you have normal sleepers, and therefore I've decided to add that as well in my city. Also, I think I gotta say that with the current remaining space in my city, I don't think it would be worth it to add the tram line, but having in mind that I'll move the city within the next month or so, I'll definitely then extend this upper section of the city as well, and then furthermore extend the city. And now for the next building, but we'll discuss the rest live in just a second, I'll probably add a building similar style or similar sized to this shop right here. When it comes to the train track layout, we now have a few different options. Option number one would be theoretically to extend the entire thing along a straight line, but I think you know me by now. This is boring. This would once again highlight this grid structure of Lego, and therefore this isn't a real option. This would be the most interesting option. Adding a switch right here. Here you can see the connectors, so I could add the switch right here, and then at a 45-degree angle, I think we have to remove one more curve for that, extend the entire thing down there, although we then would have once again a straight line going this way. So the most logical option for me at this point at least would be to add a curve right here and then have a 45-degree angle at which the tram then goes along the streets. Although right now, as I mentioned earlier, this part up here will be extended in the future location, and therefore I cannot really plan the exact layout right here. But just so you get an idea of my thought process, these are my current options. Since I was constantly talking about the grid structure of Lego and that I wanted to get rid of it, especially this corner right here in front is a bit annoying, I of course elevated the entire platform right here for the upper section of the Lego city, and therefore I now have this very sharp and sort of aggressive looking corner, and this also once again then highlights this very linear straight rock face right now. And this will then be the first aspect where I want to tackle this grid problem, because right here at the moment the rock face ends with this very smooth surface, which honestly looks a bit stupid. But if we take a step away from the entire thing, you might actually already get an idea of what I plan. I want to extend the rock face down here into the harbor, and then we also get rid of this very straight rock face. We have the problem of the flower bed being exactly in the same straight line as the train tracks are. Then we have the entire rock face ending in the exact same line, and this is always something that I do not like because it isn't very realistic. So what I want to get done before moving my Lego city to the new location next month is first of all extending the entire harbor down to the rock face right here, hopefully also including the rock face part that goes down into the harbor or the water. Then up here, I want to have the next meter of the train tracks or tram line, however you want to call it, planned out. Also, you can leave your ideas for the train tracks down in the comments. And of course, I want to start designing the tram itself. So with that being said, that's it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.